Hello and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones, recording in my church, Northwood Christian Church, on a loud and raucous day as the schools have just recently let out and all the kids are playing outside. So apologize for the noise in advance. I think we'll make it. And it's a good thing, too, because here in a moment, we're going to be going over a very, I think, important story where Jesus climbs a mountain and then he lights up bright white. So bright that he was hard to look at. What can we make of this? Is he just put on a light display or does it have some deeper significance? Well, we'll be going over that in a moment. But first, some housekeeping issues. First, our podcast. This Northwood podcast is recorded by me in my church where I pastor, as previously mentioned. Northwood Christian Church sits at the corner of 46th and Central Avenue in Indianapolis, Indiana, if that means something. Or, if you like, you can read more about us at our website, which is www.indncc.org. That's INDYNCC.org. And there you'll be able to read about the goings-ons in our building. And you can also find recordings of our Bible studies there. We're currently going over the book of Revelation. Quite an undertaking. As well as worship services from the past, recordings, as well as pre-recorded sermons, all that stuff, announcements, the like, information about the different tenants in our building that might be of interest to you. So please, if you find the time, check it out. And also, please let us know who you are and what you think about this podcast, about church, about life, about anything. If you are interested in writing in, please send in your emails to Heath, Heath, at indncc.org. That's Heath at indncc.org. And I'd love to hear more from you. Or you could leave a comment to this video or on this video, or if you're listening to this through a podcast, you can like or subscribe. All of these things will help connect you to us, and I'd love to get to know more about you. Before we proceed, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the good people at the All Indiana Podcast Network for producing and distributing the Northwood Podcast. They make it available on all streaming platforms, so you can find it just about whoever you are with whatever phone you've got. And also, they host a wide variety of other podcasts recorded and produced in Indiana. The topics run the gamut from pet advice to politics to sports to, what have you. There is something for everyone. So please check it out. But now, here, changing gears, in a moment we'll be going over a passage found in the Gospel of Mark chapter 9. But first, we need to pause for an ad break for our podcast audience. If you've been here before, you know what this means. If you're watching through YouTube, we'll just sit through a moment of silence. But for those of you listening to this in a podcast format, here are some ads. And we're back. And as I was saying, today we'll be going over a story found in Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 8. That's Mark 9, verses 2 through 8. And without further ado, let's get to it. It reads, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became dazzlingly bright, such as no one on earth could brighten them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. Last week, after a long day, my family and I decided to go out for a late dinner. It was really our only option as we had run out of time. School night, needed to get the kids to bed, but we had to eat dinner. By late, I mean we're sitting down to eat around 9 p.m., which is late for kids, But we did enjoy our time together. We reframed things and said this is just going to be a late night. And so we had a good evening. And after the bill was settled, we loaded in our minivan to head home to get the kids to bed. As I've been saying, it was getting late, maybe pushing 10:30, 11 o'clock now. And on the drive home, my wife, Kelly, began to speak energetically, trying to call my attention to something. She said that someone was lying down in the middle of the road. And I said, nah, probably just a coat. I was looking at it and I saw what she was looking at, and to me, it looked like an old pile of clothes. Turns out she was right. There was a man in the road and seemingly in pretty bad shape. So we pulled over and got out of the car. And then there was another car I noticed that had just pulled over ahead of us, a man and a woman inside, and they seemed frightened. So I asked what was going on, and they explained what they had seen. They pointed over to the bus platform just off to the side, about 20 yards away, and a man and a woman who were shouting at us. I came to be aware in the noise and the din and confusion. There were two individuals shouting at us angrily. And the man on the platform, I came to learn from the couple in the car, had jumped the man on the ground, beat him up bad, and then robbed him. And sure enough, I looked down to see that this man's pockets were turned out. Laying on the ground, in and out of consciousness, in visible pain, can't get up. Pockets turned out. While we were waiting for the police cars and ambulances, I sat down by the man. I'm a pastor, so I feel compelled in those moments to be present. I placed my hand on his elbow, not really knowing what else to do, and also careful not to move him should I cause him more damage. His teeth were sticking straight forward. He was in and out of consciousness, as I said. He was in a bad way. So what we have here is a true and honest Good Samaritan scenario. Literally, couldn't get it any clearer in the modern time. A man beat up by the roadside, if you know the story, people passing by, just like in the Bible. And I watched things play out that way. I saw vehicles drive by, some of them, their tires mere feet from the man's head, where his head lie, as if it were too much effort to tread tenderly around what was obviously a serious situation. Seemed like people just wanting to rush by and wash their hands of it. And then there was the couple who called in the assault, who sat by in their car. They were scared, and who could blame them? And they were present, but they did as best as they could do. And then there was the reaction of the man who had actually beat up the fellow on the ground. And yes, he was still hanging around, let's just say 5 to 10 minutes later, before anyone had arrived, medical teams, shouting at us to leave and mind our own business. And then he and the woman he was with told us a fairly hard-to-believe tale, at least didn't seem credible to me at the time, about what the man had done to deserve the beating. And then why rob him after that is what I would want to add. But either way, the man came up to the fellow that he had assaulted, trying to explain how, it wasn't like it seemed. And he sat near him and tried to arouse him, and then pretended to be that man's friend. And that it was just his pal napping in the middle of the road, being silly, playing around. But then when it became obvious that we weren't leaving, we meaning the car that's parked next to us, and then me and my wife, everyone, then he began to get angry at us, at the man for not getting out, and at the passersby for even caring. And apparently mad at the man laying down for just existing. And he looked at me in the eye, and he stated quietly, but with an edge, that he thought I should leave, and then he motioned down to the man as if to indicate that my situation could very soon match his if I weren't careful. So not wanting to get beat up in front of my family, or in any other context for that matter, I explained why I could not leave this man's side. More on that in a moment. Basically, I couldn't leave his side because he was a man, a child of God, lying in the road. Enough said. But what does that have to do with the transfiguration? Well, as exciting as that moment was for me, it wasn't as exciting, I swear, as when Jesus was transfigured. We all have to give the story that. And not that they're in competition, but I mean, what could be more exciting than a man you believe to be endowed with the power of God, lighting up bright on top of a mountain, just like the prophets of old? And in our text today, Jesus goes and he selects 3 of his disciples, perhaps the ones who would be most receptive or able to understand what would to be conveyed on that mountain. And on that mountain, Jesus changes before their eyes. Now, the word here translated as transfigured, from which we get that word, Transfiguration Sunday, which this Sunday is, it comes from the Greek word metamorphothi. I hope I'm saying that right. Don't speak Greek. Apologies if it's wrong, but this is a word that suggests a change in form or appearance. For example, when a caterpillar changes into a butterfly, it can be described as a metamorphosis. Yet the substance of that animal, the DNA itself, we know, is still the same. The butterfly is simply the coming of age for the caterpillar, and the butterfly was in the caterpillar's blood the entire time. Similarly, Jesus transfigures, metamorphoses, changes in appearance before the disciples in quite a striking way. He lights up brilliantly. The text reads, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. That would be quite enough of a shock to be getting on with, but there is still more in store for the three disciples, like layers and layers of events that will amp up the excitement. Two of the heroes of their faith suddenly appear. There's Moses, who led the Israelites out of Egypt and received the law from God, and then there's Elijah, the prophet from the desert who condemned kings and called down fire from heaven, who also met with God on a mountain to receive God's words, as did Moses. And the disciples knew that they were witnessing something spectacular, holy, and profound. That much was clear. So Peter suggested something that might occur to anyone who finds themselves in the presence of something that leaves them awestruck. When I find myself transfixed by a beautiful landscape or by the laughter of my children or really anything of beauty that gives me joy and makes me want to pause, in those moments I want to stay in that place. I want that moment to last and to stretch out from horizon to horizon. Peter puts it this way: Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, or our translation today, 3 tents. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. In other words, let's set up camp and stay a while. There is something here worth seeing, and we need to pause and note it. See it. Own the moment for what it is. And while he is saying this, he's interrupted by yet another marvel. The text reads that then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." It's as if God is saying from heaven, whatever splendor, beauty, love, and truth you see in Jesus' light on this mountain, he got it from me. He's a chip off the old block in that respect. What you see revealed in Jesus, in other words, is God's mirrored reflection. And here in the Transfiguration is a moment where the veil that covers what is obscured is pulled back. In this scene, the disciples catch a glimpse of what was always true of Jesus. The light of God was always there, veiled by our own flawed perceptions of human flesh and bone. What the disciples saw in Jesus' transfiguration, though, was a glimpse of what happens when the veil is lifted. And this illuminated Jesus is who Jesus has always been. If only the disciples had the eyes to see it. And here's where the presence of Moses and Elisha is especially illuminating. Because in Exodus chapter 34, we read how, when Moses came down from his own mountain after receiving the law, his face shone in a similar way. Indeed, his face shone so bright that it had to be covered by a veil so that the people couldn't look on him. Apparently, they weren't ready for that straight of a revelation. This is to say that the same light that shone through Jesus on the mountain with his disciples also shone through the prophets of old. And so the disciples, in seeing this, will find continuity between their story and the prophets and the new one with Jesus, and then going into the future. And the disciples then bore witness that day to something that disciples in later years would call the communion of the saints. As they stand there with their ancestors, Moses and Elijah, the idea that those who stood as shining icons of God's love, mercy, and justice who have died are still somehow a part of us, and that we are a part of them. I wonder if those 3 disciples thought that as they were met with those heroes from their past. And as we take in and reflect on what is best about those who have gone on before us, well, they still, in a similar way, speak to us and change us from within. But it's no wonder that God's voice from heaven instructed the disciples in this context to listen to Jesus while their eyes finally see it for what it is. Listen to his words and his example, because there is revealed the word of God, spoken time and time again in ages past through the prophets. Now, God's Spirit revealed in a unique way through the life of a human, Jesus of Nazareth. So we should listen to him as well today. After all of this, the disciples collapse in fear. There is, after all, only so much a human body can take in regards to divine revelation. Too much can literally undo us. Bite off what you can chew. I suppose the point of it all is to undo in us, in a positive sense, the things that must be undone, the flawed sight, the ways we cannot see. Lift the veil, leaving what is death dealing in us behind. But these things take courage and time. And the disciples were met with more than you or I have ever had to process. The disciples caught a glimpse of resurrected life even before the resurrection. They would meet the Jesus they saw on the mountain again, on a mountain, but this at his death and then thereafter. But in the meantime, they would have to deal with the human condition we're all stuck in. A situation so wrought with injustice, suffering, and brokenness that we can forget about the image of God that lay just beneath the veil of those who are alive today in and around us. And here it's time to return to the story I was telling you. In the beginning, the man who I saw beaten and robbed, but also I will add here, transfigured in my eyes. I realized, going back to the story, I realized about 5 minutes into the whole affair that I didn't know the man's name, the one who had been beaten. And he was conscious enough to answer some questions. He had conveyed some information to me about where he had come from and the situation he found himself in. So he gave me his name, and I began to call him by his name. And he became someone who came into clearer focus. It's funny how naming somebody can somehow bring them closer. And he responded to this well. Now that I'm naming his name, it brought him a little more life, it seemed, a little more animation, because now we're talking face to face, human to human, rather than broken body to frightened pastor. And I told him that I was a minister of the gospel of Jesus, and it's as if I forgot that detail up to that point. And as soon as I named this reality, the man lit up again. I could tell the name Jesus meant something to him, and he gripped my hand, and we prayed. And there's where the other reality was revealed. Here is where the man was truly transfigured. It's happened to me before with other people, but I never seem to remember what I've seen on other mountaintops in those circumstances. Because 5 minutes into this ordeal, I was finally able to be fully aware that I was ministering to a beautiful and brilliant child of God, whose beauty and radiance would blind me if I could see it correctly. You don't need to scale a mountain to see it. Sometimes it finds you in the middle of the street. His transfiguration is something marvelous. Remember, I only saw him for who he really was. It's not like he changed. Before, he had seemed to me like the other persons I had witnessed, living hard on the streets, but now I saw him for what he had always truly been. From the moment he appeared to me as a pile of old clothes to that very moment when my eyes were open and the veil was lifted. He was a creature made in the image of God. God's Spirit dwelt in him as it also dwelt in you and me. The veil lifted and I saw him, the glory and beauty of God, reflected back at me. And I stayed as long as I could, for like the disciples in our story, I knew that it was good for me to be there for a variety of reasons. But one, the situation being tragic, I should stay for that. But now I understand that it's even more tragic because that man's body, broken body, was holy. And his broken body made that place holy ground, whether we knew it or not. Trampled holy ground, but holy nonetheless. And how if the man who had beaten him so bad and robbed him blind could have had his eyes open before it happened and seen him for who he was, a man made in God's image. He never would have laid a figure on that man. For who would knowingly mar or damage the very image of God? Apparently some still would. But I stayed until the man was under the care of a medical team, and I recounted what I had witnessed to the police officer. Then I left. At that point, or near that time, that man made himself scarce. I don't really know how this whole thing turned out. We went back into the van, and the quiet in our minivan on the ride home was a striking contrast to the world that we had just been immersed in with all the noise and the confusion. But the magic, I should say, not magic, but the spell of what kind was over, and the world started spinning at a normal speed again. And I came down from that mountain, but I wrote down the man's name, for I am determined to remember what I saw, because what I saw revealed in him is just as true in the valley as it was on the mountain. He was always before and then and thereafter the transfigured man. If only we had all the eyes to see. I was also keenly aware that this assault occurred not 1/2 mile from the church where I pastor, where I sit right now. So it makes you wonder, what else are we missing near and around us? What other veils need lifted? What other humans need transfigured? Needless to say, I've since spent a great deal of time thinking about this man, really all week, and that transfigured man, and especially the transfigured Jesus as I was preparing this message. I've been given a new lens, a gift from God through which to see him as well as every other person I may meet, should I remember to keep that lens in focus. While God is often veiled by our limited perspectives, this story, the transfiguration that we're celebrating this Sunday, reminds us that there is more to the common people we brush shoulders with than meets the eye. Indeed, they are beautiful, fathomless, inscrutable, and glorious. The disciples witnessed in Jesus, in his transfigured state, an image of humanity to which we must cling to in hope and in prayer and never forget. And we must see that image reflected in others. In the meantime, remember that your neighbor, those that you know, all images of the living God. So too are every poor person you pass on the street. So too are every person slaughtered by our foolish wars as we speak. Remember this the next time you want to discount or ignore anyone. A person beaten in the street may conceal a beauty that must be brought to the surface and noticed. For who could lay violent hands on or rob a child of God? Who could, after having their eyes opened, bomb a child of God? Who could, after having the veil lifted, allow a child of God to starve when something could be done? Who could allow? The list goes on, because the evil we commit against our brothers and sisters in humanity seems to be limitless. But if our eyes are open, who could allow it? Open your eyes and let's raise a fuss. I contend that the reason we let things go on this way is because we don't see each other correctly. Each human then must be transfigured before our eyes so that we may see them for who they are, radiant and bright, worthy of love, a beloved child of God. And, by the way, while we are at it, so too are you. This has been the Northwood Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast by way of whatever app you use to listen, or leave a comment. These points of engagement drive more traffic our way. Or check out our website, www.indyncc.org. And also check out the other podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network. Until next time, this has been the Northwood Podcast. I am Heath Jones. Peace.